Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Rabindranath Tagore's play, The Post Office, which I'm reading out of the Methuen Drama Anthology of Modern Asian Plays. So Tagore is one of the most influential writers, dramatists of modern India. In this case, modern meaning late 19th into the 20th century. Tagore was born in Bengal, which was the headquarters of the East India Company. And so Bengal had the first actual Western-style theater in all of Asia. It was built by the British, and it brought Western-style drama to India. Western-style drama is very different than traditional Indian drama, Sanskrit drama, for instance, but various other Indian dramatic forms. And one of the things that Tagore does that's really, really interesting as a dramaturgical style is he blends Western traditions, particularly naturalistic theater, with traditional Indian performance styles, Indian philosophies, ways of looking at the world, etc., etc. And so The Post Office reflects this. The play there's some slightly absurd elements, but basically the play is a naturalistic play. The events that occur could genuinely occur in society. There's nothing exceptional, nothing supernatural. There's no Deus Ex Machina. Well, it's sort of, maybe. We'll come back to that. But there's nothing here that is outside the realms of reality, which is very traditional for 19th century and early 20th century Western style drama. But the thematic underpinning, or the philosophical underpinning of The Post Office, ultimately comes back to this very Indian philosophy of sort of transcending the world, right? Transcending, and this is deeply rooted in sort of Hindu asceticism, Islamic, particularly Sufi asceticism, Buddhism, this idea of sort of letting go of the world, and particularly letting go of one's immediate worldly desires and finding peace through that sort of abandonment of ego, we could say. So the play is basically about this young boy named Amal. He has been adopted by his uncle Madhabdatta. The uncle has basically sort of hoarded money because he didn't have any children and he never wanted to adopt. But once Amal came into his home, he has just sort of grown to love Amal, and he really wants the best for him. The problem is that Amal is sick with some kind of unknown illness. So there's a Kobiraj, who is an Ayurvedic doctor, basically a doctor of traditional medicine. He comes, and his prognosis is that Amal cannot go outside. He can't be exposed to direct sunlight. He can't be exposed to breezes that may carry bad air, noxious fumes, whatever it is. His humors are all fucked up, and he's got to stay inside. Madhabdatta knows that Amal is not going to like this. He's a boy. He's got energy. He wants to go out and play and do stuff, etc., etc. Mahadatta's father? So he's grandpa is the character name. It's not clear that he is actually related to Madhadatta or Amal, but there's this older character called Grandpa, and Madhadatta basically says, well, he says directly, the Kobiraj says that there's not much hope left. Well, with the way the four humors are all mixed up and roused in his little body, the only thing left to do now is to keep him inside the house, keep him protected from the sunlight and air of the harvest season. I'm afraid of you exactly because it amuses you in your old age to tempt youngsters to sneak out of the house. And so this really introduces this theme that Amal is going to want to leave. And shortly after this, Amal shows up, and basically tries to bargain with Mahadatta to let him go outside. Mahadatta is absolutely refuses even to let him go into the courtyard of the house. But they finally compromise and allow Amal to basically sit at the window, the open window, and look out at the world outside. And this is actually where the bulk of the play occurs. The majority of the action is Amal sitting at this window and just sort of talking to various people through the window. He talks to a yogurt seller. He talks to the town watchman. He talks to some boys who are going off to play. He talks to a young girl who is going to collect flowers to make wreaths for her father's business. He talks to all these people, and the recurring theme is basically Amal saying, "You're so lucky that you get to go out and do things and experience the world." And those other people being like, this is work. Most of them, the boys who are going to play, they don't obviously say that, but the majority of them are like, I don't even think of this as a thing that could be envied. This is, I'm selling yogurt. This is not easy labor. I'm carrying these pots of yogurt from house to house trying to get people to buy. I'm the town watchman. I have to go around and make sure everything is secure and ring the bell to mark the passage of time and so on and so on. And Amal is just like, I wish I could do this. I wish I could go out. And the watchman tells him this very odd thing. So Amal has seen that there are pennants flying on a big house across the road, as he says. He asks the watchman what it's about. And the watchman says there's a new post office there. And this is where it starts to get odd. Because, that's fine. That makes perfect sense, that there may be a new post office. Okay. But Amal says, a post office. Whose post office? The watchman says, who else? It's the king's post office, of course. And then in an aside, he says, this child is a funny one. Amal says, do all letters from the king come to the king's post office? The watchman says, indeed they do. You'll see, one day there will be a letter for you. Amal says, there will be a letter for me too, but I'm a child. The watchman says, the king writes tiny little letters to children. Amal says, oh, that would be a fine thing. When will I get a letter, and how do I know that he'll write me a letter too? The watchman says, then why else would he get them? Would he get them to put up such a great big golden pennant and set up a new post office right in front of your window? This is a bizarre bit to me. And maybe there's cultural context here that I don't understand, but I don't know why this watchman is telling Amal that the king will send him a letter someday. I don't understand it. I don't know where that comes from. But this becomes one of Amal's sort of central ambitions in life is to get a letter from the king, and then when he's better, to go and become a mail runner. And he decides ultimately, like he sort of in the play, he cycles through these different jobs that he might want to do, whether he wants to sell yogurt, whether he wants to be a town watchman, to be a sort of wandering mystic or whatever it is. But he ultimately sort of settles on he wants to be a mail runner. He wants to deliver mail to people all over the place. And this becomes his sort of big ambition throughout much of the rest of the play. Eventually, so the sort of upshot of this ultimately is the headman of the village, the guy who's sort of the political leader of this town, decides he's going to play this relatively dickish trick on Amal. And so he comes in to their house toward the end of the play when Amal has gotten sicker. He is no longer even able to go to the window. He's confined to bed at this point. The headman comes in with a blank piece of paper, gives it to Amal, and says, "Here's your letter from the king. Look, your name is written on it. He writes that he'll be coming to see you tonight." It's this, and Mahadatta seems to be absolutely furious that the headman has done this thing. Because, I mean, for no apparent reason, the headman has decided that he's basically just gonna fuck with this dying kid. Grandpa, who by this point is dressed as a fakir, a wandering ascetic in the Sufi Islamic tradition, he actually joins in on this, not out of a sense of vindictiveness, but out of a sense of love for Amal. And Grandpa says, "Yes, I can see the letters here. I can see the letters that aren't there saying that the king is coming." The weird turn at the end, really, is that this occurs. So I had mentioned the Deus Ex Machina before, the God from the Machine gesture, where at the end of a Greek play or a Roman play or something like this, when there is a problem that has not been organically resolved, a deity will often come down and say, "Here is how everything is going to play out." It's regarded today as a relatively cheap ending. The headman seems to have made this story up, right? And Grandpa has gone along with it to try and raise Amal's spirits. But then a royal messenger shows up and he's like, "Hey, the king's going to be here by midnight. Make sure there's a feast for him." Before that, the royal Kobiraj is coming to help sort of heal you better than this local Kobiraj. And then the royal Kobiraj shows up and he's like, we've got to open everything up. Let the starlight come in. That will help heal this boy. And it's this weird thing. Like, why is the king coming to see this random kid who he's confined to his house? Like, it doesn't really make that much sense. And so there is this sort of fantasy wish fulfillment element to it. But one of the things that's striking about, and so that's that. It is what it is. But one of the things that's really striking about Amal is that he seems to have this uncanny ability to envision the world, envision things that he has never seen or experienced before. Like, when he's talking to the yogurt seller out of his window, Amal is basically like, describing the village this guy comes from, even though he's never seen it. He's never been to it. But he is describing this village, how the people behave, how the women are dressed, what the sort of daily chores involve, things like this. And the yogurt seller is like, yeah, man, that's exactly my village. You must have been there. How could you know that if you hadn't been there? And Amal's basically just like, yeah, no, I've never been there. Just that's what I imagine it to be. And then when Grandpa comes in toward the end, dressed as a fakir, he's talking to Amal, and Grandpa says that the king's letter has been dispatched to Amal. The letter is on its way. And Amal sort of envisions the mail runner going through this various terrain to try and get the letter to the post office and then to Amal. And so Grandpa says, so Amal says, Fakir, I know everything. And Grandpa says, so I can see. How did you manage that? And Amal says, I don't know the answer to that. I can see things in front of my eyes, as if I've seen them many times before, way long ago. I can't remember how long ago. Shall I tell you about it? I can see a king's mail runner coming down and down the mountain, all by himself, with a lantern in his left hand and a sack of letters on his shoulder. He works his way down the same slope for days and days and nights, and then at the foot of the mountain where the waterfall path ends, there he takes up the path along the meandering river, getting closer and closer. He comes down the narrow paths that go through the millet field near the river. Then there's a cane field. He gets closer, walking along the high earthen ridge that borders that cane field. He walks alone night and day, day and night. The crickets call in the fields, and there isn't a single human being down by the river. Only snipes sashaying around and showing off their tail feathers. I can see everything. I feel waves of gladness filling me up the closer he gets. So, Amal, whose greatest ambition for the entire first, at least half of the play, had been to go outside and to do things and to see the world, is envisioning the world. He is experiencing it without having to actually experience it. And this is tied to this sort of inner peace, inner acceptance that he develops as his condition ends up worsening in the latter portion of the play. So at one point, Grandpa says, so what's so sad about staying home anyway? And Amal, who again had wanted to go out, been desperate to go out, says, no, I'm not sad. When they first told me I had to stay in the house, it felt like the days would never end. But since the king's post office appeared, I feel good every day. I feel good even sitting in this room. Someday my letter will come and I can sit happily here very quietly just thinking about it. But I don't know what will be written in the king's letter to me. And then Grandpa says, that doesn't matter, as long as your name is on it. That's the only important thing. And so again, the upshot of this ultimately is the sort of acceptance of fate, this acceptance of the existential conditions of reality, of humanity, according to the sort of philosophical dictates of Hindu philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, and so on and so on. This idea of transcending the physical self, transcending desires, and finding peace, contentment, and joy through that transcendence.